Ah, the whip. A tool that definitely hurts, but I'm not sure how effective it would be in a fight in reality. Luckily, we're in the world of fiction where it can do all sorts of crazy maneuvers to be a useful weapon in battle. Comics, anime, and video games have given the whip a great home in the fight scene, with fighting games using whips as a niche tool that a handful of characters choose as their go-to weapon. So let's find the best whip users in fighting games, suggested by viewer FandomGirl20. For this list, these characters simply have to use a whip by definition while fighting, whether it's a bullwhip, a riding crop, or a whip made of something that can only exist in fiction. I will be excluding characters that use chains or hair as whips though, because chains are different enough to be their own topic someday, and hair whips were a big part of my hair manipulation list. Otherwise, just be a fighting game character that's cool and creative with a whip if you want to be ranked high with the top 10 whip users in fighting games. Number 10. Lenny Creston from Art of Fighting 3. She was a character, alright. Lenny looks pretty generic, like she's a common enemy you'd see in a beat-em-up game from the late 80s or a minor antagonist from Gem and the Holograms. Her whipping attacks are very standard, being single or multiple strike attacks at a range, with a projectile of unspecified whip energy. Not much else special about her weapon. The main thing I like about her is her backstory. She's a journalist and she participates in the arcade ladder so she can get the scoop for a big newspaper article. She thought it would be a good idea to break a story about the game's final boss, and Freya, an NPC involved in the story who never returned in future games that continued the story of Art of Fighting or King of Fighters. Lenny teams up with fellow roster member Roddy to help her with this case, making for the most 80s duo ever. By the way, this game came out in 1996. In her ending, she even drags him off with her whip. Aw, that's cute. She thinks she's gonna need him for more missions in all the sequels that are gonna be in. Number 9. Dandy J from Waku Waku 7. Dandy J is a cross between Indiana Jones and Joseph Joestar, which explains why his only weapon is a whip, and every attack with that whip is over-the-top, super masculine action. While he does strike you with his whip like every other character on this list, he makes sure all of his power goes into every attack. You feel the pressure with each crack of that whip. The intensity from these attacks can even form fire. I can't tell if he controls fire or if he just builds friction from the strength of his whip motions. And being based on Indiana Jones, of course he has enough precision with his whip to grab onto things from a distance. Only here, instead of grabbing onto objects he can swing on like Indiana Jones, Dandy just grabs onto his opponent because that method is much more direct if his ultimate goal is to deal damage. Number 8. Zero Suit Samus and Super Smash Bros. Traditional whips need to move over because we have a plasma whip, aka it's made of pure sci-fi energy. The whip itself looks cool, but outside of one move, Samus still primarily uses it as a normal whip. The main unique thing it seems to do is spiral when extending out completely, since this whip does not have to comply with the physics of a normal long whip. Otherwise, the plasma aspect of the whip doesn't come into play much outside of it retracting for ease of transportation. It's also vital for her grab, as it's her tool that gets a hold of the opponents with a much greater range than the other characters in Smash Bros. Who grab with their tiny T-Rex arms. Beyond that, she uses the whip in ways you'd see a whip realistically used in a fighting game. However, it seems she forgot one of the ways she could whip it upwards after she got a pair of moon shoes when transitioning over from Brawl to Smash 4. Number 7. Goodman from Neo Geo Battle Coliseum. Goodman is meant to be the broken final boss who sits back and watches your suffering as he has a bunch of nonsense fight you on screen. However, he does have a whip made of fire. Despite the threat that should impose, this whip is more meant to control his giant purple fire monster spirit. Is that how we classify this thing? He'll tug the whip, which sends the command for his fire spirit or some other garbage to take over the screen. If you get too close to Goodman though, he will materialize the fire whip and use it as a normal whip that leaves a small burn effect upon contact. It has no other fire-based effects that benefit Goodman or hurt the opponent. Goodman leaves all the fire tactics to his Flame Beast friend. It's a shame he didn't get more imaginative with his own fire attacks themed around the whip. He could have always used it like Ghost Rider's flaming whip-like chain, for example.
Face me! Stay down!
I guess you can't expect too much from a guy who is uncreative enough to say his dislikes are simply anything that doesn't belong to him. That means he doesn't like me. Number 6. Simon Belmont in Castlevania Judgment. Simon Belmont is one of the most iconic and skilled whip users in gaming history, being the original protagonist of the Castlevania series. He's only held back on this list by the fact that his fighting game, Castlevania Judgment, was not too good. Despite that, he was actually able to show off his whipping skills pretty well. The game had a very open 3D environment, allowing Simon to jump around and move more freely while swinging his whip, which did give him some style points in how much he was able to make the whip twist and turn in all sorts of curvy directions. He doesn't look stiff when attacking, making it a successful transition from the 2D plane that limited the directions he could aim his whip. If only he could make an appearance in a better 3D fighting game. You know, Sul Calibur, Castlevania takes place around your time period, so... Number 5. Catwoman in Injustice. The whip is a big part of Catwoman's moveset and appearance in Injustice. While she does not do super complex whip attacks, her main whip technique is a single whip crack, which has multiple uses. It can end combos for a hard knockdown, anti-air, and much more with just a single hit. The whip has some purpose in starting combos or as a hit in the middle of a combo chain, but she always sticks to one crack of the whip before putting it back. Her super move uses the whip for grabbing purposes, just dragging her opponent in any direction she pleases, like pulling them with the whip while riding full speed on her motorcycle, followed by her blowing up said motorcycle, which is hardly practical. Multi-$1,000 motorcycle brought to the fight so she could blow it up. Well, joke's on you, Selena. How are you getting home after this fight? Good luck getting Swamp Thing to drive you home in his pile of moss. The whip is also a clever part of Catwoman's costume in the first Injustice game, acting as the tail, making it both fashionable and convenient to grab for fluid combos. Now see, Selena, that's a significantly smarter idea than the whole blow up your only mode of transportation plan. Number 4. Poison from Street Fighter. Poison uses a short whip as her go-to source of attacks in games under the Street Fighter title, but in her first playable appearance in a fighting game, she uses a much longer whip. Final Fight Revenge, anyone? The game may not be good, but it set the stage for Poison's fleshed out moveset in a fighting game. Her long whip was pretty standard, being a good single-strike long-range tool, but it was used in her super move in that game that was translated over to her super combo in Ultra Street Fighter 4. We call this move Thunder Whip. In Final Fight Revenge, she jumps in the air, spinning her whip as it rains down sparks, or flowers. It's hard to tell with these Sega Saturn graphics. She tries to emulate this in Street Fighter 4 with the short whip, but she only does the spin with no other effects. There's a significantly higher ratio of whip to thunder in the Street Fighter variation. Poison's Street Fighter short whip usage is not only part of her special moves that she'll use for projectiles and Rekka chains, but it's greatly involved with her normal moves, such as being her heavy punch. And of course, you can't forget her ultra combo shows Poison has a lot of spunk when she weaponizes a more kinky usage of a whip by leaving her opponent's booty stinging for days. Number 3. Sophia from Battle Arena Toshinden. Behold, the quintessential fighting game dominatrix. Despite that, this character's actual backstory is her trying to learn about her past since she suffers from amnesia. She ultimately never recovers her memories, but is motivated to make new ones, like memories of fighting with a whip and wearing leather. She's a very skilled whip user, not using too many flashy techniques, but rather an onslaught of strikes in a single attack. She can also create rings of lightning, How? I don't know, but maybe her past might have told us that if she ever bothered to recover those memories. By the third game, the roster expanded by creating clone characters, so Sophia's main rival was her equal Zola, who fought with a whip that did more damage with the same looking moves as Sophia, how coincidental, and a green projectile that's made of fire rather than lightning but looks exactly like Sophia's lightning if it was green, also coincidental. I guess she's different since her whip has a blade at the end. While Zola is the stronger whip user, Sophia is the more skilled one. With that alleged skill, Sophia killed Zola in the third game in a rival battle. Luckily, Zola somehow made it back to the world of the living in 2004 to be a stunt double for Halle Berry in Catwoman. Number 2. Ivy Valentine from Sul Calibur. By far, she has the most unique whip, because it's also a sword. A sword whip? A swip? Well, technically World Heroes did it first, but Ivy was more creative with it. Ivy forged this weapon to avenge her adoptive father's death at the figurative hands of Soul Edge, so check off Ivy as another character who seeks to destroy Soul Edge. Get in line. She based it on the Chinese segmented whip, calling it a snake whip. However, she felt it needed an extra oomph, so she met with someone who could imbue it with magic power. That character she met with turned out to be Nightmare. You know, main villain Nightmare, who's the embodiment of Soul Edge, the sword she's trying to destroy. What a wacky coincidence! You couldn't tell this guy was evil? Well, the glowing red eyes were a warning sign, and the monster hand was suspicious, but he had magic with him, so I could overlook the untrustworthy traits. Through this process, Nightmare brought her weapon to life. Ivy soon after learned her biological father was a former wielder of the wicked Soul Edge. This day just keeps getting worse for Ivy. With the sword whip now alive and optimized for Ivy, she could command the whip to move in all sorts of directions a normal whip could never emulate, even with the most skilled master. The whip can burrow underground and emerge anywhere on the screen, strike from the air, grab opponents anywhere on the screen, and coil around Ivy for proximity damage. The fact that it can disassemble and reassemble opens up its potential to astronomical levels, and that doesn't even include all the normal ways she can use her sword whip as a whip. Ivy makes it hard for me to put her one step below the top pick, but it seems destiny has chosen number 1. So on a list about characters that embrace the whip in fighting games, if you are so embodied in your theme of being a whip user to the point where you're named after your only weapon and you manage to do all sorts of cool maneuvers with it, you win. I can't argue with you. Number 1. Whip from King of Fighters. Her speed with her weapon is unmatched. She can basically perform all the maneuvers we've seen from other entries on this list with her whip named Voodoo. She isn't limited to any one certain type of whip fighting style like some other entries, with attacks ranging from quick strikes to grabbing with precision using her whip. Her skills are possibly a result of being experimented on by the evil organization Nests, who creates superhumans by abducting innocent people who show great potential. While Whip's powers are technically unknown, it's assumed her adeptness with her weapon and the whip itself is a result of Nests. The latter is assumed since the whip has some interesting properties, but we'll get to that soon. Luckily, Whip, or Sarah going by her actual name, joined the Ikari Warriors so she could fight against the evil organization that took away her memories using the same fighting tactics they gave her. Whip has a natural finesse when swinging her whip. We have the varied range attacks with her that we've seen before, but she generally manages to get in that unexpected hit after a standard attack, either hitting you with some recoil or sneaking in a jab. She'll even straight up curb stomp you if she grabs you and pulls you in with the whip, and of course she can swing on it like a rope to complement her natural fighting abilities. This whip though has some surprises. If Nests did give her this whip prior to her escaping them, they have a good weapon development program. The whip holds a blade and a gun. The blade seems to fit in the handle, adding to her close-up game and dismantling the law of conservation of mass more than the game has already done. The gun appears to be a transformation of the handle, making the whip useful on all ends. She even carries around a regular gun, in case, well, I'm not sure, because she wants to shoot and whip at the same time, yet she uses both hands when shooting the gun, so there goes that theory. Regardless, the whip and its secrets are just as awesome as the character by the same name, making her the perfect #1 whip user in fighting games. So what did you think of these choices? Did I cover every worthy character, or are there some characters that can crack that whip in fighting games even better than the characters I discussed? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.